All right, it's time to learn about the amazingness that is CSS preprocessing, specifically the CSS preprocessor called Sass. Here I am looking at the tutorial page that the link for which has been provided. We're going to walk through this so that you get a sense of what can be done with Sass, as well as how we can do some setup using our simple starter to get going. So first and foremost, it's important to note that generally speaking, we're going to be writing CSS. We're just going to be having some extensions or additional things that make this more powerful. But that does mean that what we write is going to have to be compiled down into pure CSS before we can use it in our websites. So there's lots of different methods that we have for doing this. One of them is a terminal script that Sass provides, through which you can have Sass watching your files. So in this case, it's going to be watching input.scss. So notice that different extension, and it's going to compile it to output.css. So that would be the standard CSS file that we could point to in our sites. Okay, so bottom line, we could have a script watching and compiling basically as we work. That's the method we're going to go with in this video, but there are other ways that we can do this. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over and pick up in this simple starter file where we have a section down in here that talks about how we can begin to add Sass to our site. So let's pick up here. It says, first of all, we want to ensure that we have a styles.scss file inside our source folder. Okay, so we have a styles.css. Let's just go ahead and rename this to scss. Okay, now if you had additional files, we just have this reset.css, which isn't as big of a deal. But if you had a whole other folder of nested, or not nested files, but additional CSS files, then you'd want to make sure to do this step of renaming them all to Sass files. Bottom line is, if that they have this Sass extension, the SCSS, then they will be recognized by the Sass parser and be parsed. Okay, so we're not going to mess with, well, yeah, let's go ahead and change the reset file here. This isn't as big of a deal, but we'll do it to be consistent. Okay, so we have renamed that as such. Okay, now before I get any further, I also noticed while I was over here looking at my code editor that I have some unsaved changes, and I'm going to be making some decent things here, so I should probably go ahead and commit these. But before I do, I actually also want to make sure to switch to my develop branch. So I don't have that one locally yet, so I'm just going to add it just like this, spelling it exactly the way that I do anywhere else I've used the branch. Otherwise I end up creating two different branches. So there is the branch, and then this handy tool is going to ask me, do you want to leave your changes that you have existing? Do you want to leave them on master or bring them over to develop? And we definitely want to bring them over to develop. Okay, so before I, let's see, yeah, we'll just go ahead and commit these, update with full styles, and begin Sass conversion. Okay, all right, so I have now saved those. I'm going to also push them up onto the remote along with my develop branch. Okay, so we're good to go to carry forward now. All right, so I'm just going to close these extra files I don't have open. Okay, picking up here, we would need to make some changes to our package.json file. So if you look at what we have here in the new version versus the original, we're not going to touch name, version, or description, or even the main file, but we do add a few new scripts. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of these scripts, paste them in here, and just fix my formatting. Okay, this is the same browser sync that we had before, and but this time what we do is we add in the Sass processing, and then we modify our start script so that we are doing sync and Sass at the same time. So then we also have author and license are the same, but we have some new dependencies, so we're going to want to bring over those dependencies, replace them so that we have all the correct dependencies. Okay, so now since the dependencies have changed, we want to make sure that we run npm install one more time so that we get those new dependencies installed in our node modules folder. So one thing to know is whenever you reinstall or update things, it's always a good idea to first clear out your node modules directory. So whereas npm install would run the install, you can abbreviate that npm-i for short. There's a more cohesive one called CI. So let's run npm CI. And before we do that, I'm also going to remove this package lock JSON and run the npm-i step one more time. So sometimes, bottom line is when we're dealing with the npm repository, it can be helpful to first remove that node modules directory and the package lock JSON file before we get going. All right, so that went all smoothly. Now, once again, we can run npm start. All right, so now our server is running again. And so as we work, we can see the changes over here. Now, first thing you might notice is that our styles went away. Well, that's because this very first time that we've not made any changes to our styles.scss file, so we have not actually created the compiled version yet. But if I just go in here and do something real similar like that, you can see that there's some processing that happened down here in the terminal. And then bada bing, over here we have our styles. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened there. See how we have our Sass file, but now we also have this new styles.css file. This is the compiled version that Sass created for us, and it may have a little bit of funky formatting here and there, but all in all, right now, it's basically a duplicate of our existing styles. Okay, so now we can begin to talk about some of the cool things we can do with Sass and watch what happens as that Sass gets compiled over here. So if we look at our tutorial file, one of those amazing things that we can do with Sass is that we can use variables. All right, variables in Sass are defined like this. So we have a variable named with a $sign. And then the convention is to use a kebab casing for these variables as well. And then a colon, and then any number of spaces. Spacing doesn't matter there. I think they're just aligning the definitions there, followed by the value that you want to assign. And notice that you can assign any value that is a valid value for a property in CSS. So in this case, it's a comma-separated list of font properties. In this one, it's a hex code for a color value. All right, so you define the variable, and then you can use that variable anywhere you like inside of a CSS property. So here for font, you can see that they put the font stack after this 100% setting, and for the color, they just stuck it right in there. So let's go through and replace all of the color values that we have in this file with CSS properties. So the one color I see is this one. Let's use a naming convention like this where all of our colors begin with color dash, and then perhaps this one is the brand color. Oops. So we're going to copy that and paste it. Okay. All right. So now what we can do is find everywhere that we've used that hex color and replace it with our variable. So I'm using the find and replace tool here in Atom, which is a good one to learn. So when I click find, it's going to highlight one case, and I don't want to replace that one because that's my original definition. So I'm going to click find again, and it's now moved on to the next matching result. And if I want that to be replaced by the variable, then I can just click replace. Okay, and it's moved automatically onto the next one where I say, yep, that's the one, replace, replace, replace. Okay, so now everywhere that I want that color used, I now have a variable, which means if I ever decide I want to change that to a different color, well, I can change the definition one time and Sass will compile it over everywhere this variable appears. So to see what I'm talking about, let's switch over to the compiled version where we can see here, oh, there's the A tag. And sure enough, that variable has been included there and there, etc. So if I change it, let's say we just do something silly like make it red, the compiled version has now changed all of those instances over to red. Okay, pretty nifty. So again, that is happening because we have this processing script, pre-processing script watching this SCSS file, and it's as we work, it's outputting that changed content over here. Okay, so very good. We've got that variable being used. So following what was in the tutorial, what if we went through and, oh, I guess we need perhaps to finish out, there's some other places where we have variables used. Okay, so this will seem silly, but why don't we do this for white as well? I suppose it's possible that you might have a case where you want to use not true white, but like a slightly off white. And so here's a case where we could use a variable to represent that slightly off white if we ever wanted to. So find it, and we're going to replace that one, and it looks like there was only one use of that, but now we have a variable for any future uses. Okay, let's see if we can finish this out by finding any other colors. All right, here's one. This is a we'll call this the alternate color, brand alternate. Actually, I think this is used for hyperlinks, so let's call it the accent color. And I like to change all of my letters to lower cases, so we're also going to go ahead and make that change while we're here. Okay, so we're going to find that, and we're going to replace it with that. So find, not that first one, but that one's good, and that one's good, and that one's good. Okay, very good. Let's see if we have any other colors. All right, we have a grayish color here. Looks like that's used, and then we have this orangish color a few times. Okay, so we'll do those. So there's the gray. Now with this one, gray, you know, it's quite possible that you might end up having a whole bunch of variations of gray. Gray, darker, gray, darkest, etc. It becomes kind of a pain, but since we just have this one for now, I'm okay with this name. Otherwise, I might want to think a little bit more about my naming convention so that I set myself up to not have a whole bunch of confusing labels for the gray color. All right, so we're going to find that. Oops. And we're going to replace it with color gray. Okay. All right, good. And last of all, we have that color, which was the gold color. I think we're using that for some borders, maybe some accent colors here and there. So let's call this one our brand alternate. Okay. C, E, there we go. All right, so now we can find that and replace it with color brand alt. Okay. All right, so we've, in that little bit there, made some good use of variables by using color variables. Next, let's replace our fonts with a similar sort of situation. So it might be that we want this one. This might be our font body. Okay. And then we might also have a font display for the Tico, like this one here. Okay. All right, so now we're going to search for all instances of this and replace it with that. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Good, so we had 3 places where that was used. And we probably have a few places where this one's used as well. Place there, there, there. Okay, good. So now we've used variables. All right, there's all kinds of other things you could do. Basically, anytime you have a value that repeats and repeats in the same sort of semantically consistent kind of way, it's a good opportunity to use a variable. So obviously it may be redundant to do something like for text align center just because you have a whole lot of text align centers in your document or something like that. But another good one could be font sizes. Another one could be widths for a number of things where width is consistent. So make sure to look through and think about what ways you could do this that would be beneficial to your setup. All right. Variables are one fantastic thing we can do inside of Sass. Another one, which is a really cool feature here, is this nesting. And the basic idea is that it's supposed to help us simplify our selectors so that we don't have these super long and repetitive selectors. Instead, when we want to have nested selectors, we can actually physically nest the nested stuff inside of a parent container. So here's a really good example right here where we have styles for the plain old allergies selector, and then we have styles for something that is a strong inside of allergies. Well, all we need to do is basically pull this like that, and we can get rid of the little bit of the stub that we had left over. Okay, so see how strong is nested inside of allergies? So what's going to happen when this compiles is we're going to get the allergies style that we had before, and we're also going to get a separate allergies strong selector, just like we had before. But now we don't have the repeat of the allergies word. So let's go take a look over here. And there you can see is what we have. There's the original allergies one, and then the allergies strong. And again, the formatting is a little funky, but we're not too concerned about that because this isn't the style the file we're working in. Okay, so that nestedness is a really nice feature that we can make use of anywhere we see that we have some nested styles. However, doing the refactoring or making the changes to put this into play can get a little bit confusing. So here's a method you might find helpful. So you see how these all make use of that categories root. What I'm going to do first is copy the two that were nested and paste them in with that root in place. Now I can see right here that I don't need that root anymore, so I'm just going to go to each of these and delete that root. Okay, my formatting got weird there, but okay. So now they're nested inside, so they will compile with the categories up front. But I see now that I'm this layer in, I've got one more layer that I could nest as well with this lib. So once again, I'm going to copy the whole selector, paste it inside, and then find the repeat and get rid of the repeat. Okay, now we want to be checking this as we go to just be sure that we're not running into errors. It's very important that as you do this for each different one you do, you should be checking to see that what you did actually makes sense. So I made a couple of changes, and we want to make sure to just go back and look at each of those. So one of them was on the had to do with allergies, and here's that allergies block. And so we should see a bold and a text align center, and yeah, that still looks good. Let's see, the other one that we just did was the categories. Okay, so that's also here where categories li are text align center. That's looking good. Let's just check a setting here. The bold tags should be the teal color. That's good. So it looks like we didn't goof anything up there with those changes. Okay, very good. So that's the idea, that we can go through and look for any other places where we can nest our selectors here in order to make things a little simpler. So I'm going to finish this out. Now here's a case where I have a whole bunch that use this nav root, but I did not have the nav root. So I'm just going to add it, and then once I paste these guys in, I can still get rid of the root like I've done in the other places. Now here we have an interesting situation as well, where we could bring this li active A inside of this li up here. However, because the active is attached to the li, we have one other little catch that we want to do. Okay, because right now what's going to happen is we're going to get nav li space active. Okay, I'll show you that over here, and it breaks the style as well. Let me just make sure. Oops, there, that's the problem. Okay. All right, so it's overall still correct, except there's the active class, and we've got bullets hanging out here that we'll see why in a moment. But the active class is not working. It's because it needs to be attached to the li. It's actually placed on those li tags, okay? And we can see that over here in the compiled version, we are getting nav li space active A. All right, to ensure that this gets fused onto the li, we can make use of this little special character in Sass. This basically says take whatever selector we have up to this point, and it's represented by that. So by doing this, we are making it more clear that that dot active needs to be fused right against the end of the li. Okay, so we save and we go back and we see we've got that selected style back, and in the compiled styles you can see it's corrected with without that space. Okay, so this is something that we need to use whenever we want something attached, like a pseudo class, a hover, or something like that. And we'll carry on from here. All right, so we've used all of our nested styles, and looking over the site, things are still looking to be in good shape. All right, so we've used variables, we've used nested styles. What else can we do? Next up in this tutorial sheet are two things, partials and imports. Okay, so the idea with a partial is along this best practices idea of breaking out all of our styles into small modular files so that each file is as small as possible and focused on one set of things. So hopefully you've been exposed to this idea and maybe even done it with some normal CSS files. The downside there was that we had to include all of those, and that meant that we had all kinds of CSS files being kind of nested together, which leads to a larger kind of overhead for the site. So with Sass, we can do the same thing from a file standpoint, but because this is all being compiled, it's going to compile into a single sheet instead of having all of those different nested sheets. So it's going to look like there's all these separate sheets from the development side, which is nice for us as developers, but for the performance side on the front, it's going to still compile down to one sheet. So the catch here is that we need to name these partial files carefully with an underscore at the beginning of them. When we do that, that tells Sass, don't compile this file. Okay, so let me give you a vivid example. If I go to reset right now and I make a change, I'm not sure why it's not. It may be that I would need to restart the processor to see it. But what we can do to follow the partials idea is indeed to rename this with an underscore at the beginning to mark it as a partial that should not be processed. Okay, so by doing that, we can then go into our import, and technically, oops, sorry, let's keep track of what we're doing here. This file name has now renamed. So this is actually why we were getting those bullets, because I renamed this to SCSS, right? And I never changed that reference here. So if I change it to SCSS, okay, notice that right now, it's not, we're not seeing that file yet. We're still seeing those bullets where the reset should be taking care of removing those bullets. And right now, if I put this underscore in place, it may be that I need to restart the server here. Okay, since I named files differently and things like that, sometimes it's helpful to just restart the process. So I hit Control-C to stop it, and now I press start again, and we should be seeing that. Okay, so right, because it's not a URL anymore. If I looked at the sheet here, yep, we don't need to use the URL reference anymore. So we can get rid of that. Okay, and now you see that's working. So here's the bottom line. When we put the underscore in the file name, the cool thing is we don't have to recognize that over here when we do the import. So we just do import space, quotes, and then the true name of the file, omitting that underscore. So the underscore is basically ignored by Sass in terms of the file name, but the underscore tells Sass to also ignore processing the file separately. It's only going to be imported into this file and then processed as a part of this file. So you can see over here in our compiled version, once again, that whole reset file is indeed being brought in, but it's being merged right in with the rest of the content in styles.css. Okay, here's a point to go and look at what we have again in our simple starter, because the way that this is set up is actually for you to have a separate subdirectory for all of your partials, and you can even add subdirectories under that. So we want to add a new folder called SCSS, okay, and then we're going to put any of our partials right inside of that directory like this. Because I moved a file, I'm going to restart the server. Okay, look, everything still works. Now, this is a cool little feature too. Notice that because of the way that the simple starter is set up, it's inside of one of these package scripts here. It's actually set up to look for our Sass files in that SCSS file, folder and parse them. So the bottom line there was, as long as something is inside of this root folder, SCSS, we neither need to include the underscore at the beginning of the name nor the SCSS folder. Sass knows to look there as a base for any of the partials that are a part of this site. Okay, so I'm going to move this down and start doing some other work. So maybe we have a separate file for our variables. Oops. Okay, and we're going to move our variables over there and include variables. Maybe we include it first so that we have those variables available. Okay, now I got an error in my console. Let me save, and it may be that I just didn't have any changes there, so it looks like the error went away. Refresh, make sure that our variables are still there, and they are. Good. So now we can continue to break up this one big main CSS file into all the different subfiles that we want, just like we've done in other projects where we make things more modular. Okay, so let me do some of that. So here's a good example. This categories would be a good example of something we could add. So I'm going to put this in a modules folder, and this is going to be categories. Okay, so I pasted that in. All right, so that file exists now. And then instead of having those styles directly in this, I'm now going to put them in this import. But now I do need to include the modules folder in my path, so I can ignore the SCSS and I can go straight to modules and then import the categories. Okay, again, I can ignore the underscore at the beginning of that. So let's see, here's where we should see those, and everything still looks good. Notice that as well, and I forgot to do this on the top two, but when we have a Sass file, we can actually also omit the .scss extension at the end too, and just put the file name. So things that are just making our jobs a little bit easier by having less to put in. Okay, so last note, once again, even though we put those into a separate file, in our compiled version, we still get all of those styles merged in right here. So let's see, it may be coming in at the very top. Yep, there it is. Okay, so after the reset, the variables are coming in, but there's nothing to them, so they're compiled right out. And instead, then we move on and see the categories with the variable values actually showing up. So there you go, nested styles and partials. And so we could go finish this out. In fact, I provided a suggested structure where you do some basic layout things, type things, variables, etc. And then, of course, you can have subfolders like we did with the modules. Okay, let's see what else we can do with Sass. The one last topic I'm going to cover in this video is mix-ins. The idea with a mix-in is extending the idea of variables to not just a value that repeats, but an actual collection of settings that you want to repeat frequently. So, a great example of this is how many times when you're setting up a type setting, do you provide 3 settings commonly? The font family you want to use, the font size you want to use, and the weight. Well, it'd be nice if we didn't have to enter all 3 of those all the time, every time, right? So that's an example of a mix-in. But before I do that one, because it's a little bit more complicated, another good example of this is how often do we set display flex and flex flow row wrap? Be nice to not have to set that all the time, every time, right? So here we go. We're going to create a folder called mix-ins. Oh, no, a file called mix-in. Okay, and when we define a mix-in, we first enter it like this, where we use the mix-in keyword and then the name of the mix-in. So let's call this mix-in flex. Okay, and then we're going to put in here the properties that we want to appear anytime this mix-in is called. So we'll do display flex and flex flow row wrap. Cool. All right, so now we need to make sure that we include those mix-ins. So we want to make sure we include mix-ins. Okay, so mix-ins is now being brought in and compiled as a part of this, which means any of these mix-ins are available. So now all we need to do is find places where we want to use that mix-in and replace the properties with that value. Okay, so field group is a case here where I only have display flex set, but I don't mind if flex flow row wrap is also set. So in place of that value, I'm going to go include and then name the mix-in that I want to include there. Okay, so when you define it, use the mixin keyword, and then when you use it, you use the include keyword. So include flex. And you'll see in the compiled version, if I find that field group, there are those two properties coming out. So all I did was enter that one mixin one time, and now that property is, those two properties are appearing wherever I have that. So that's pretty slick, huh? Let's go ahead and put that in some other places. There we have another setting. All right, there's another one, I don't mind using it. There's another place. Another one. Okay, so let's just double check our site. Things do generally still look good, so I think it worked. All right, so that one is pretty simple, where all we're doing is bringing in those same properties. They're always the same properties. But if you want any variation in them, for example, like we talked about a minute ago with the font settings, we can also provide parameters, just like you can functions in say, JavaScript. So here's what I'm talking about. Let's say we want a type setup mixin, okay? And it's going to have font family, and we're going to provide a font family. Okay, I'm going to use a variable here, and then allow that variable to be passed in as a parameter on this mixin. Okay, I'm also going to set a font size and use a variable for that, and then allow that to be passed in. Last of all, how about a weight? Okay, and then again, that variable will be allowed to be passed in. Okay, so now anytime we want to set up a full set of a font setting, we can call type setup, pass in the font family we want used, the font size we want used, and the weight we want used. Okay, so mixins is already included in our style sheet over here. So now all we need to do is look through for places where we have all three of those set and replace them with our mixin. Okay, so here on body we have two of those three set. The only one that's not set is font weight. And I can think, well, do I actually want to go ahead and provide weight? Sure, it wouldn't hurt to do that. Okay, so before I delete them, I'm going to leave them there so that I can see the settings. So I'm going to use the include keyword this time and call my mixin. And then the font that I want used is font body. The size is 1.6 rem, and the weight is 300. Okay, so now I don't need the other anymore. All right, now I'm going to copy that and use it where I want it. Here's another example. So font body is good, size is good, but the weight is 400 this time. And then I can get rid of those three. Okay, let's see. Here's one, font size, font weight. Font family is omitted. I'm going to go ahead and skip that one because I don't know if I really want to provide the font family there as well. And it looks like the font settings are similar anyway, so they might inherit. All right, down here we have the H2. So I'm going to paste that in, but notice that I have a different font display. And the size is 4.3, so pass in 4.3. And the weight is 500. All right, so that can go away. And that can go away. All right, you can see this becomes a pretty nice little shortcut, doesn't it? So I don't have to always set those three settings. Here's one last one. Font body, 1.6, and 300. Not 5,300. Okay, and you could put as much in here as you like. I do admonish you, though, to try to keep things as simple as possible. I have certainly made some pretty complex mix-ins in my day, and they can become a little bit hard to manage over time if you make them too opinionated. That's kind of how we refer to it, being too complex. Too much stuff in a mix-in can make it a little bit unwieldy. So keeping them small and modular and simple is a good idea. Okay, I forgot my thing there, so let's go grab that again. And here's where I was. Alright, so display 1.9, 500. Okay, I think you get the idea. All right, so look for this kind of idea where you have any number of things that you repeat frequently. And you probably know those by now. Things like margin zero auto and other stuff like that you can refactor out into mixins and then replace easily throughout the rest of your document. And there you have the power of Sass. So charge ahead, and I wish you good luck with your adventures in Sass World.